I would like to welcome in now retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General Richard Newton, one of our News Nation's senior contributors. Lieutenant General, great to see you. This is a big deal. I mean, we have been talking for months about this. First of all, just talk about the significance of this if this does in fact happen.
Well, good afternoon, Nicole. This is a major development, and I think there's three key points. I'll talk on top of Robert, his comments. First and foremost is the fact that Hamas, now led by Mohammed Sinwar, is really feeling its backs up against the wall. The relentless pressure by Israel militarily in the Gaza Strip, especially the northern part of Gaza. Secondly, Prime Minister Netanyahu has now garnered significant political support within his own party, particularly on the right side of his political leanings. That is key. But third, and I believe foremost, is now President Trump taking office on January 20th. And as Robert said, made comments that there would be significant price to pay. I believe President Trump said there will be hell to pay if the hostages are not released starting on the 20th. And so I think those three key issues right now have led to what have been on top of several months of negotiations and the last several days with discussions in Doha, Qatar. The parties have now somewhat come together. It's all been based on, however, Nicole, over the past several months leading up to the last several hours, the position of Hamas. Hamas has been relentless in their position that they will not strike a deal to release hostages unless there is a permanent ceasefire in place and or if Israeli Defense Forces must leave Gaza. That is to be determined later. And that will be determined after the first phase of hostages are released, after about the 16th day, let's call it the end of January, the first part of February. Those other discussions to go into follow-on deliberations will then ensue.
So, General Newton, it's interesting there. You mentioned the incoming president and the fact that, yes, just days ago, and really for months, he has threatened. We know he said specifically that there will be hell to pay if a deal was not reached before he takes office. Of course, that happens on Monday. What about that potential threat, if that may have been the thing that did it? What about that potential threat do you think was enough to sway change?
I believe that was indeed, I think, the most significant part of the compelling aspect of the change of the negotiations. The fact that also Hamas saw, and the rest of the world saw, that President Biden's envoy to the peace negotiations was also there in tandem with President Trump's envoy. And so you saw a very much united front between the Biden administration, which will be bowing out here in a couple of days, and bringing on a very strong, purposeful, deliberate administration in that of President Trump. President Trump, through his broadly talking points and his perspectives on U.S. national security, has been very clear that he will lead this nation with peace through strength, whether it be Ukraine, Russia, or certainly China, Taiwan, but certainly in the Mideast. And you're seeing a more bolstered support publicly, diplomatically, and you'll see that with continuing to provide military capabilities to our dear friend and ally, Israel. Hamas sees that. And so I believe that's where that was certainly a turning point that ended up arriving at this point now where we've got appears to be a breakthrough and a ceasefire agreement in hand.
In General Newton, I mean, do you think this is imminent based on everything we've seen, based on the fact that this war has raged on at this point for 15 months? Do you think this is imminent? Is this a done deal?
Well, this is the closest we've seen in several months. Nicole, you and I have been on air a number of hours talking about this. I haven't seen a deal any closer than this. And so forth. I also believe the dynamics that we just talked about in terms of the geopolitical aspect of this, the fact that Hamas is nearly decimated there in Gaza, also the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu domestically, politically has been strengthened. Hamas sees all that, and all parties see that. And so I think what we're seeing now, I'm fairly confident now, more confident than I've ever been, over the last several months, that we will see a deal here. You're going to see an exchange of Israeli prisoners. I understand the number is 33. How many of those are alive? We do not know. Of that first exchange of 33 prisoners, then you'll see several, if not hundreds, of Palestinian prisoners that are being held by Israel. These are not small-time prisoners. These are murderers, core terrorists that will be released and so forth. But I believe this is a significant breakthrough. I think it will follow through.
So we know that this is supposed to happen in phases. Are you confident that all of the phases will actually happen, that things won't break down at some point, that the deal to stop the fighting and release the hostages will actually be seen through to the end?
I'm not confident at this point on going beyond just the release of these first 30 hostages, because as I mentioned, Nicole, as I understand the agreement outlines that within 16 days there will be discussions on follow-on implementation accords with regard to the next tranche of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners and so forth. And then there will be discussions on top of that that will lead to what would be the second phase of the release of the remainder of the Israeli hostages, but also what will be the position of Israel vis-a-vis, I'm sure, what's going to be Hamas's demand on a permanent removal of Israeli defense forces and as well as the permanent aspect of the ceasefire. I do not believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu, nor would I advise Prime Minister Netanyahu to sign up for either the permanent removal of all Israeli defense forces nor a permanence of this ceasefire, because Hamas is still, in my sources, there's still 5,000 to 10,000 or so Hamas terrorists in the Hamas military organization, and Mohammed Sinwar, the new leader, is recruiting and trying to build that terrorist force even as we speak right now. And so I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is keenly aware of the timing of this, but he's also keenly aware that Hamas is still has some modicum of capabilities only 30 miles to the south of Tel Aviv. What he cannot do, and what I would advise him certainly not to even consider, is to allow Hamas to be any position where they could reconstitute, reform, and then reattack, much like we saw that devastating attack back on October 7th of last year. So you have to throw all that into a conundrum that all parties face. But no, we are not out of the woods in terms of phase 2 or phase 3 of this negotiation.
Yeah, certainly not out of the woods. Lieutenant General, what do you think this means for the wider regional war? I mean, because we know Israel certainly is not just facing pressure from Israel, also Lebanon, Iran. There are a lot of things happening at once. How do you think this will factor into what is happening on a larger regional basis?
First and foremost, I think this will be a significant win for Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. And they've, over the last several months, with the decimation of Hezbollah leadership in Desmond, they've been able to craft a ceasefire with Hezbollah to the north. I think that's been very successful up to this point. The fact that Iran did those 2 significant ballistic missile attacks against Israel several months or so ago, and Israel was to defend itself, very capable. And then Israel did a counterattack back in October and nearly decimated the air defenses of Iran and so forth. And so what that does is that demonstrates the capability and the will of Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. So they have the upper hand here. There are other still forces of evil that want to do harm to Israel, namely the Houthis down in the south, North Yemen. They are still a proxy organization, somewhat financed by Iran, but are also in a position where they see the cards on the table as well. Israel has gone in and attacked, I believe, twice against North Yemen, against Houthi strongholds there. The Houthis, by the way, is not just a threat to Israel, but it's a threat really to the global, certainly the Western powers, but others, because they have been controlling the Red Sea, where 12.5% of commerce actually flow through the Red Sea. So my point is that I believe Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu are negotiating this potential ceasefire agreement with strength, and I believe that he's done that with certainly his capabilities and his demonstration of not only capability, but the will to enforce those capabilities against threats to Israel. Final point on that is we also have what I would call a new sheriff in town with President Trump, because he has been very clear, very vocal in his support of the Israeli people and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he has really been very public, saying that Israel needs to do whatever it needs in order to defend itself, in order to bring the hostages home. So the geopolitical or the diplomatic support that you're going to see from President Trump and his administration after January 20th is also significant. So there's somewhat of what has taken place by the strength of Israel and its demonstration of force and capability. but also the political support that the United States now is going to provide Israel for the foreseeable future.
And Lieutenant General, before I let you go here, certainly this is supposed to be, if all four or if all of the phases are carried out, this is supposed to be a permanent ceasefire. We know that this is a conflict at this point, this particular war that has been raging for 15 months, but we know it certainly goes, much longer. It goes back even further. There's much more to it than that when we zoom out, much bigger than 15 months. How significant is this ceasefire deal when we talk about the long-term hostilities between Israel and Gaza?
Well, you're right. The hostilities and the conflict between Israel and the Palestinian people goes past decades, if not centuries. But the fact that we are going to be able to see an agreement, at least in this time and space, is historically significant. Whether or not this has a very positive outcome on peace for the next several years or so, that's a different issue. That's a different challenge, because that's not necessarily Israel against its diabolical foes of Hezbollah, Iran, Hamas, Houthis, and so forth, but it's the greater Mideast. It's the countries such as Saudi Arabia and others that, and we go back to what President Trump led several years or so ago in the Abraham Accords. I think what the next step is beyond this ceasefire, this three-phase ceasefire is one thing, but the broader Mideast aspect of this and how this will bring to perhaps a more permanent peace solution is the relationships brokered by the United States. It's going to bring Israel and nations such as Saudi Arabia together to at least recognize one another, exchange ambassadors and so forth, and move it step by step through a rejuvenated, under President Trump-led Abraham Accords.
Well, retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General Richard Newton, always a wealth of knowledge. Certainly appreciate you weighing in on this breaking news. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.